Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves Caitlyn Clark.
You would think that after rewriting the record books, shattering every viewership benchmark in college basketball, and injecting life into an entire professional league, the questions surrounding Caitlyn Clark would finally disappear. But if you thought the noise was fading, you clearly did not see what unfolded at Madison Square Garden, because Stephen A. Smith has now delivered one of his most explosive verdicts yet. And this time it is not about a box score, a turnover, or a logo 3. It is about what she did on national television during her NBC debut that left the entire sports world scrambling to process what they had just witnessed. The billing of the night was supposed to be the Los Angeles Lakers versus the New York Knicks, a classic clash inside the mecca of basketball. But when the final buzzer sounded, the conversation had shifted completely. Every camera, every headline, every debate centered on the woman standing courtside who locked eyes with Carmelo Anthony and Vince Carter and showed, without saying a word, that she was not there to visit the stage, she was there to command it. Yet beneath the applause, there was tension building, a quiet current of disrespect, subtle shots from legends, and a revealing off-camera moment with Jamal Crawford that Stephen A. Smith is now bringing into the light. Because the version of Caitlyn Clark the public thinks it knows is not the full story. The smiles were real, but so was the edge, and what Smith says he witnessed that night changes everything about how the basketball establishment must now deal with her from this point forward forever. To understand why this night carried so much weight, you have to understand what the network was trying to build around her. This was not just another broadcast slot. This was a statement play by NBC, a deliberate attempt to seize control of the basketball conversation again by placing the single most talked about figure in the sport directly at the center of it. They didn't just invite Caitlyn Clark to sit in on a segment. They built the entire presentation around her presence at Madison Square Garden, surrounded by icons like Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, and Carmelo Anthony. These are names that defined an era, voices that have shaped the modern conversation around the sport. And yet, before the cameras even rolled, there was already a wave of skepticism rolling in from every corner of the basketball world. The criticism came fast and it came loud. People questioned whether she would fit. They questioned whether she understood the men's game deeply enough. They questioned whether she could stand shoulder to shoulder with legends who had lived through playoff wars and championship runs. It was the same gatekeeping energy that has followed her since her first college broadcast, the same quiet suggestion that she should stay in her lane and be grateful for the attention she already had. But when the red light came on, something happened that nobody on that desk expected. She didn't hesitate. She didn't defer. And she definitely didn't shrink. As Stephen A. Smith later described, her presence did not resemble a guest appearance. It felt like a takeover of space. She cut into discussions without apology. She broke down defensive coverages with clarity. She challenged takes in real time and backed them up with specifics. The body language wasn't respectful distance. It was professional equality. And for a lot of viewers, that was the exact moment the narrative shifted from curiosity to realization. But what the audience didn't fully see on the surface was that the tone for the entire night had already been set long before that first segment went live. Because behind the scenes, during what was supposed to be a light pre-game segment, the competitive edge that defines her was already on full display in a moment involving Jamal Crawford. It was meant to be a fun exhibition. A quick shooting game to entertain the crowd and warm up the audience. Nothing serious. Nothing intense. Just a playful back and forth between two basketball minds, and then she lost the first round. For most players in that situation, especially in a television environment, that would have been the end of it. A smile, a handshake, and a transition to the next segment. But that is not how she is wired. Witnesses say the shift in her demeanor was immediate. The smile stayed, but the focus changed. She asked for another round. Then she asked for it to be extended. Then she made it clear the segment was not ending on a loss. What followed was not playful anymore. It was clinical. Precision shooting. Deep range. controlled confidence. She didn't just win the next rounds. She dominated them, sending a very clear message to everyone in the building and everyone watching at home, and that was the first signal of what the rest of the night was going to become. Not a guest appearance. Not a novelty. But a declaration. The shift in tone from that pre-game moment carried directly into the live broadcast, and it is here where the night's most controversial exchange unfolded. While she was actively breaking down the game and demonstrating a clear command of both strategy and tempo, a comparison came from the panel that instantly changed the conversation across the internet. When Reggie Miller attempted to frame her style by referencing Payton Pritchard, the reaction was immediate and intense. Because for many viewers, that wasn't a compliment. It felt like a ceiling the moment lingered on camera. Her expression shifted slightly, just enough for the audience to read the disbelief without her having to say a single word. She didn't respond verbally. She didn't challenge it on air. She didn't interrupt. But that silence became louder than any rebuttal could have been. It told the audience everything they needed to know. And later, when the topic was revisited, the conversation exploded across sports media. The reason it resonated so strongly is because the comparison highlighted a pattern that many fans believe has followed her from college into the professional spotlight. When male players dominate early, they are compared upward. They are linked to legends. Names like Stephen Curry, Luka Doncic, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson get mentioned. But when it comes to her, the comparisons seem to shrink. The ceiling gets lowered. The praise becomes qualified. And that is exactly the double standard that Stephen A. Smith later called out with force. But while the debate over comparisons dominated headlines, the numbers that came in afterward told an even louder story. Because when the ratings for the broadcast were released, they confirmed what the audience had already felt in real time. The matchup between the Los Angeles Lakers and the New York Knicks had pulled in massive viewership. And while stars like LeBron James were on the court, the conversation online and across media platforms centered on the analyst desk. It centered on her presence. Her reactions. Her analysis. Her confidence. The phrase that Stephen A. Smith repeated over and over again when those numbers came in was simple. She moves the needle. And that statement carries enormous weight in an industry driven by attention, ratings, and advertising power. Because if one player can influence the audience of an NBA broadcast without even stepping on the court, then the boundaries between leagues, between roles, and between traditional expectations begin to collapse, and that is exactly where the discomfort started to show, because for some in the media ecosystem, her success represents opportunity. But for others, it represents displacement. It represents change. It represents a reordering of the hierarchy that has defined basketball coverage for decades. And when change moves that fast, there is always resistance. That resistance is the undercurrent that has been building beneath the surface of this entire story, and it is the piece that gives the night its lasting significance. Because what happened during that broadcast was not just a strong performance. It was a demonstration of influence. It was a glimpse into a future where the lines between leagues are not barriers, but bridges. And for many traditionalists, that is an uncomfortable idea. Inside the arena, the reaction told a very different story. When she appeared on the court before tip-off, the crowd response was immediate and unmistakable. It wasn't polite applause. It was recognition. It was energy. It was the kind of reaction reserved for stars who have already proven themselves on that stage. And for a player representing another league entirely, that moment spoke volumes about where the audience's perception already is. Back at the desk, the chemistry that developed throughout the broadcast continued to build. Conversations flowed naturally. Disagreements were handled directly. Analysis stayed sharp and specific. There was no sense of her being out of place. If anything, there was a sense that the format had expanded to accommodate her voice. And that is exactly what network executives pay attention to when they evaluate long-term potential, because this was never intended to be a one-time experiment. It was a test case. A proof of concept. A demonstration of what could happen if one of the most recognizable figures in women's basketball became a regular presence in the broader basketball media ecosystem. And based on the response, both in ratings and in audience engagement, that experiment succeeded beyond expectations, which leads to the bigger question. What happens next? If she continues to appear on broadcasts like this, if she continues to deliver analysis at this level, if she continues to draw audiences at this scale, then the traditional boundaries that separate leagues, roles, and markets begin to dissolve. The WNBA benefits from the exposure. The NBA benefits from the expanded audience. Networks benefit from the ratings. Sponsors benefit from the reach. It becomes a shared ecosystem rather than a divided one. And that is why this night matters beyond the highlights, beyond the debates, beyond the viral clips. Because it marked the moment when a player known for changing the economics of one league proved she could influence the entire sport. Not just on the court. Not just in the box score. But in the way basketball is discussed, presented, and consumed. The broadcast may have been scheduled as a regular season game. But what unfolded around it felt much bigger. It felt like a shift. A transition. A signal that the next phase of basketball's media landscape is already beginning to take shape. And at the center of it is a player who has made a career out of turning doubt into momentum and momentum into something much larger than the game itself. But Stephen A. Smith turned the entire narrative on its head in his closing argument, insisting that by walking onto an NBA stage and commanding the moment, she didn't just elevate her own profile, she elevated the entire WNBA platform. When the face of that league can sit next to legends, challenge them, outshine them, and control the conversation, it forces the wider basketball audience to confront a new reality about where the game is headed. It wasn't just visibility. It was infiltration. A seamless crossover that turned a standard broadcast into a gateway for millions of viewers who suddenly found themselves paying attention to a league they once overlooked. Every reference she made to her journey, every nod to her teammates, every breakdown of the game was another signal that the women's game belongs in the same spotlight. And the fact that she reinforced that message while defeating Jamal Crawford in a segment meant for entertainment only strengthened the statement. Smith focused on that unmistakable expression in her eyes, the same intensity he has seen in figures like Kobe Bryant and Larry Bird, the look of certainty that doesn't ask for permission. When Reggie Miller delivered his comparison, that expression didn't waver, it sharpened. She recognized in that instant that validation from the old structure was no longer necessary because the performance, the ratings, and the audience had already spoken. The approval of gatekeepers loses all value when you control the stage itself. She arrived in New York for a debut, but she left having redefined the conversation around her, around the leagues, and around the future of basketball media. And if Stephen A. Smith's warning holds true, this moment was not a peak but a launch point. The Caitlyn Clark era is accelerating, the influence is spreading, and the sport is being reshaped in real time with her at the center of it.